Welcome to The Referral with me, Dr. Karan. This is your weekly science podcast to improve your understanding of the human body and give you actionable science-based tools to improve your health. I'm Dr. Karan, I'm a surgeon in the NHS, and I'm also a medical school lecturer. Now, in today's episode, I want to talk about something which is not really talked about a lot, and it's literally a silent epidemic. It's all about hearing and hearing loss. Joining me today to discuss hearing loss and hearing impairment is Tasha Ghouri. Now, she is from Love Island, one of the world's biggest reality TV shows. She's a fully fledged celebrity, podcaster, dancer, and a massive advocate for the deaf community.
And we actually had an open conversation about this a few weeks ago, and a lot came out. And, you know, they were at the point where they go to bed in tears, feeling guilty.
Wow.
And that's how, I don't want to cry, but that's kind of how bad it got in terms of growing up.
And coming up a bit later in the show, I love answering your questions. So I'm going to answer a bit in crowd science, the bit where you ask a question and I'll do a deep dive into that. Now, if you want your own question featured on this show, get in touch at thereferralpod.com. If you want to listen to even more scientific explanations and deeper dives into your health curiosities, go and subscribe to The Referral Plus. You can also get all of my main episodes completely ad-free. Just visit the referral show page on Apple Podcasts and hit the try free button at the top of the page to begin your free trial today. Before we understand how hearing can go wrong and hearing loss can develop with all the flaws and glitches of the body, I'm going to take you back to school and give you a much more fun science lesson on how normal hearing works. So how do you hear sound? First of all, you've got the big flappy bits on the outside that you can see, the pinna, that's basically your human version of antennae. They gather the sound waves and they conduct it down the ear canal. And then they hit the eardrum and cause the eardrum to start to vibrate. And depending on the type of sound and the frequency of sound, it can cause differences in how fast or how much the actual eardrum vibrates. And these vibrations of the eardrum are then passed through three very tiny bones, the malleus, the incus, and the stapes. And if you remember that from high school biology or whenever you learnt it, that literally stands for hammer, anvil, and stirrup. Now, these tiny little bones are miraculous. They basically act as sound amplifiers. Whatever sound vibrations are, created by the eardrum, that is amplified by these tiny little bones. Then the stapes, the stirrup, the last of these tiny little ear bones, it then knocks on the cochlear, which is this snail shell shaped little thing. And now we're reaching the inner ear. And if you've got a mental image of your head of a snail shell with all its spiral type shape, that is essentially what the cochlea looks like. It's filled with fluid and filled with thousands and thousands of tiny little hairs called stereocilia. Now, when these little ear bones knock on the cochlea, it causes that to move around and the fluid moves, and the fluid moving causes these hair cells to move as well. Now, as soon as these hair cells start to move, it changes that energy of movement into electricity. And that electricity is then passed through the auditory nerve, the 8th cranial nerve, and then goes through as electrical signals to the brain. The brain then reads that electricity as the sounds you perceive. That is a biological miracle. I can't express how complex and how beautiful that all is. And that is how normal hearing works. Tasha Ghouri.
Hello.
Thank you very much for joining me in this podcast. If you look at the UK as a whole, I was pretty shocked to read that about 12 million people in the UK are deaf.
Yeah.
So that's about 1 in 6 people are deaf. And I suspect that figure will be mirrored in probably every country in the world, that 1 in 6-ish figure. Mm-hmm. Being a part of that deaf community, it feels sometimes like it's isolated and cut off, but they're friends, family, colleagues, co-workers.
It's crazy to think that in the UK, like you said, it's literally 1 in 6 people that are deaf, and there's not much spoken enough about it. Like, I feel like it's very overlooked in terms of it's not a proper disability, and it's more of a hidden kind of disability. That's not the case. It actually does affect our lives daily, in and out. Every day it still affects me, but I still get on with it. And, it's something that I was born with. Like you said, I was born into a hearing family. So it's something very, very new for them. They have no idea how to navigate and deal with, me being deaf. And I have an older brother as well, and he's hearing. And it was kind of tough as a family to go through while growing up. And it was such a big thing for them to adapt to. They really had to change ways around me and really put a lot of attention into me and a lot of effort. That's why I went to mainstream schools, because they kind of put me in a situation where I had to force my speech to get better. I had to be around people that had conversations. I really had to work hard and learn to communicate. And I was the only deaf person in my school.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. You were born deaf?
Yeah.
I mean, if you don't mind me asking, what was the specific cause of the deafness?
We actually don't know.
Oh,
you know,
right.
the doctors just said sometimes it can just happen. It wasn't genetic.
Really?
No one in my family is deaf at all. So at first it was kind of a shock, because my family was like, oh, we didn't expect this at all. Or there's no family history about it. So the doctors just said it can just happen. Sometimes, you know, we can be born with a disability. It's just how it is.
Yeah.
They found out when I was 12 months old, which is quite late on.
Okay, yeah.
And that's just because I wasn't responding to like squeaky toys or like responding to my parents' sounds, voices. And they were a bit like, okay, she's not responding how she normally should be. And they went to do hearing tests, and that's when they said, okay, she's deaf. And that's kind of where the journey started, pretty much.
So what was your first involvement with medical professionals in trying to, you know, give you some hearing back? What was the first treatment you had or interaction?
So my first operation I had, I was 5 years old, and it's quite late on because my parents had to make that decision for me. They're the ones that kind of have to say, okay, you're going to get a cochlear implant. Because I was 5, I couldn't make that decision for myself. I had no idea what's going on. And at that age, back then, this is literally, how old am I, 25? Literally 20 years ago.
Wow, yeah.
So technology back then isn't like how it was now. So it's kind of experiment to see how it would work on me. So that's why I only got it on my right ear, not on both ears. And it's just kind of just to see, okay, let's see if this will work out for her, because sometimes it won't work and sometimes it will work. And that's just how it works. And yeah, so it was 5 years old and I couldn't speak until then. I was doing BSL. Before then, so I was fluent in BSL. So even now, like, sometimes I talk with my hands. But yeah, that's how I was communicating. And then I had to force my speech. I had speech therapy after when I was 5. And I had to stop using BSL to get my speech better.
So when you had that surgery at 5, that was a cochlear implant that you had. What is a cochlear implant to you? I mean, did you dig into like how it all works and the science behind it?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I don't know the scientific words as such, but basically you've got an external and an internal part. So the external is like an earpiece. I say it's like a cool, like spy device kind of vibe.
So like a Bluetooth headset type thing, right?
It's just like, it just goes around the hooks around the back of my ear. The microphone's at the front. And you've got the internal, which is what the operation's for. And it's very, very clever how it works. But basically the internal, so I've got a magnet in my head. The coil, the external coil connects to a magnet inside my head, and that's what activates the implant, internal and external. And when you're talking to me, the sound the headphones, it travels through the microphone at the front. It goes through the wire, through the magnet, into my ear, and that's how sound travels. And it's like a processor that recognises sounds and transmits it to my brain. That's basically how it works. I don't hear from my ear, I hear from the implant. So that's where people get a bit confused. So it's kind of like, I say it's like a robot earpiece, basically.
I think it's fascinating. When I was a medical student, I did like a 4-week attachment with an ENT surgeon, an ear, nose, throat surgeon. And I saw a couple of, quite cool things. One was like a bone-assisted hearing, or bone-anchored hearing device. And one was a cochlear implant. We saw the surgery. It took about, sort of an hour or so. And literally, getting into that and using these coils and using that coil to go directly into the hearing nerve, the auditory nerve, and basically firing electricity so it goes and feeds the sound into your brain. When you first got that as a 5-year-old, you're saying before 5, I'm assuming you were non-verbal? You didn't speak at all?
Yeah, I was non-verbal,
And it's just purely sign language, British Sign Language. And you mentioned before about how obviously your family had to adapt for you because no one in your family, was deaf at all. How much of a change was it for them? Was it stressful for them? What was the kind of like the family situation like in your younger years?
Oh, I think it was definitely tough for them, but we were lucky we had a lot of support around us. So the primary school that I was in, we were really supportive. And I also had a carer called Marianne, and she would come round and do speech therapy lessons with me. She'd be there with me in primary school. She'd do lessons with me and, a lot of extra work on the outside. But I think for me, growing up, when you're growing up as a child / teenager, you're kind of figuring out who you are as a person and you compare yourself. That's what just happens naturally. And I was comparing myself in such a negative way to other people, being like, why have I got this disability? Why am I deaf? Like, why me? And that put a lot of pressure on my parents to the point where I'd actually would blame them for making me deaf. It got that bad. And we actually had an open conversation about this a few weeks ago, and a lot came out. And, you know, they were at the point where they go to bed in tears, being guilty.
Wow.
And that's how, I don't want to cry, but that's kind of how bad it got in terms of growing up. Because, like, for me, I'm so thankful that I got this gift in a way, because I'm doing what I'm doing now.
Yeah.
But back then, I was just struggling so much with my confidence and knowing who I was and dealing with my disability. And born into a hearing family, they're not obviously going to get everything that I'm going through. And I think that's what was hard sometimes. My parents had to really try and understand why sometimes I just get frustrated and just sometimes get my implant and throw it out. There were situations like that where I literally would just get so angry with myself. Or if there's a conversation I'm missing out, I just get really upset. But they were so supportive and they stayed with me throughout and they were patient.
Yeah.
And I think that's the main thing. Patience is key. And I think just being understanding, and we're so close, like we're a family.
80-90% of deaf children are born to hearing parents. So your situation will be mirrored by most deaf children for a certain age until they either regain hearing or at least partial hearing. So, you know, those struggles, those anxieties and frustrations will be quite common. And I guess, did you ever feel, you mentioned sometimes you were frustrated that you weren't part of a conversation. Did you ever feel socially isolated, either at home or even at school, to the point where, you know, even you'd get bullied because of your perceived difference?
Yeah, there's been many times where I feel socially isolated, even to this day now, when I go to events and there's so much going on. I'm like, oh, there's a lot of background noise. I can't understand what people are saying, to the point where I just sneak out and just go home and just sit in the living room.
Sounds like me, yeah.
But luckily in school, I wasn't bullied as such, but I was cyberbullied. But that's just like keyboard warriors kind of situation. Yeah. But luckily, face-to-face, I didn't go through that. I had really good support of friends around me in school. But there'd be times where my friends would have conversations, because I have to lip read as well. And I would feel a bit left out because I'd be trying, so this is what I do. So there'd be a conversation, I'd be just nodding along, being like, yeah, just fake laughing. I'm like, haha. Someone starts laughing, I'm like, haha. Thinking like, I have no idea what the conversation is. Even to this day, I do that now, like I so now. And it's a weird thing, especially teachers in school, when you're sat in a classroom, even there'd be times I'd be put at the back, not even at the front.
Really?
Yeah, there wasn't much consideration taken in place. And you know, when teachers write on whiteboards, they'd turn away, they'd be talking to the whiteboard. I'm sat there like, I need to see your face, I need to lip read. So there'd be times where I missed out on so many notes. And I did okay in my exams, but I could have done better if I got everything that I needed to get. So yeah, there's a lot going through school. There's a lot of isolation, but I was lucky enough to have friends and support around me to get through it in a way. But even to this day now, I still struggle with conversations and big groups, going to bar, and even like me and Andrew, if we're going somewhere that's noisy, I'm literally like, I honestly cannot hear you right now. We'll go somewhere a bit quieter. So it's just figuring out what's best for you in a way.
That was actually pretty powerful in terms of, I think we underestimate the impact that deafness and lack of understanding from people in school, people in positions of authority like teachers can have on the education and learning of a deaf child. Like you mentioned, that would directly affect a kid's grades. And then it's easy to say, oh, he's a deaf kid and he's not doing well because of his deafness. But actually, it's because we're not shaping our learning environment to improve his situation or her situation.
Yeah, 100%. It's actually a proven fact. I did a campaign a few weeks ago. I was on This Morning. We were actually talking about how deaf children in schools are missing out on so much information and their grades are lacking purely because of that. You know, the teachers aren't aware of how to make it a safe environment for them and actually make it better for them. And that's something that we're fighting now. And we're trying to get teachers to even go through like a deaf awareness course or something.
Even now, like you mentioned, when you were younger, you had the cyberbullies and things like that. Do you get any of that now with your bigger platform where you got more people aware of your condition now?
Probably triple,
Really?
quadruple I had before, yeah.
Oh my God.
It's crazy. Even when I was on the show, I think people couldn't accept the fact that, you know, times are changing. And, you know, me going on a show is kind of groundbreaking moment of, you know, someone with the hearing loss is going on a show that wears a cochlear implant. And there's so many comments such as, you know, I'll whip out a cochlear implant, throw it in a pool, her voice is annoying. I always see comments every day, probably 3 to 4 comments a day about my voice. Because we have something called a deaf accent.
Yeah.
And that's just purely because it's just something that we have, the way our tone is. Our accents are very different to a normal hearing person's accent. And I try to educate that as much as I can, but people still will take the mick out of it and really slander it down. But I'm quite strong in that way to kind of turn it into a positive and think, okay, I can use this to educate people and share that message that, you know, the reason why my voice sounds like this is because da-da-da-da-da. And yeah, unfortunately, it's something that you know, do have to deal with having a bigger platform, but I knew that was going to come with it going on the show. But I'm just very shocked at what people can say and just write on that keyboard. It really is surprising.
I really don't understand it because those people who do comment, you know, toxic things online, they probably know someone with a hearing impairment or who are deaf. It might even be their family.
Yeah.
So it really shocks me because if you look, you know, 1 in 6 people in the UK who are deaf, you probably know someone or a friend of a friend who is like that. So if your friends saw you writing that, what would they think?
Exactly.
You know, it's quite weird. Do you still use BSL? Are you still fluent in it now that you don't have to use it so much?
I'm trying to get back into it more because growing up, I really had to not use it for my speech to get better. To the point, even in school, this is what I think if it was taught in schools, I would have carried on with it and still would have it now. That's why hopefully GCSE, BSL will come in school soon. But unfortunately, I didn't have that. So I kind of had to really, you know, my family also around me had to stop using BSL to communicate with me through speech. And so, yeah, we're trying to get back into it now because, you know, it's a part of the deaf community. It was a part of me as well. And I do want to get that back. So I'm eventually going to go back into it.
Why isn't BSL part of a school curriculum? Is that, I mean, I'm presuming you weren't taught that at school specifically, and it's something you had to learn to then fit in society. I mean, is there anything that you've seen, any evidence that it will ever become a thing in school where you just learn it as like another language, basically?
Yes, I actually went to the Department of Education the other month. It's currently in the Parliament at the moment.
Okay.
Yeah, so hopefully by 2025 it will be in schools to learn as a GCSE course. I learned French in school. And I mean, it could be beneficial for people, but for me, it wasn't. I've not once used French ever since I learned it. Whereas BSL, there's so many deaf people that I do meet, you know, out on the street or they come over to say hello. And it just goes to show that it's about making them feel more included and making them feel more accepted in society. And it's about those little steps and little changes. So it is getting there. And I hope by 2025 it will be a course.
No, I absolutely hope that happens because, as you said, it allows you to open up to a bigger demographic. So as someone who's obviously not deaf, I might have deaf patients. And as a doctor, you know, I don't want to be typing out all my stuff and showing it. I should learn BSL so I can communicate directly in that deaf person's kind of, you know, native language, as it were. So it's easier for them to understand what I'm saying and I can treat them in the best possible way. And obviously, I mean, this is a bit silly, but, you know, I saw that movie, The Quiet Place.
Oh, yes.
Obviously, you need to know BSL, otherwise you'll be, you know, killed by the creatures. So a lot of people think that it's just for hearing and hearing sounds, music and people talking. But actually, it's also contributes to your sense of balance as well. And I know your background is dancing as well.
Yeah.
How was that, being deaf and then getting your cochlear implant and then dancing? Did it affect how you learned dancing and your sense of coordination and balance?
Well, so basically, how it all started, I used to watch Steps on TV and I used to follow the dance moves. And Mum and Dad was like, let's take her to a dance class, see what happens. And dancing and music massively helped with my hearing. And I think it's because you're learning music, you're understanding beats of the music. And the way I feel the music, I feel it through the vibration and through my body. And I don't necessarily hear the specific lyrics unless I go on Google and learn it, then I'll know. But if it's a song I never heard before, I just go off the beats and feel it through like my headphones. I can feel it. I like, we hear it so differently, but it feels so good. And with dancing, it just became my passion. Like, I just loved it. It's interesting because obviously we have a sense of balance. We do lose a bit of balance. And, if we're doing a pirouette turn, if I turn to my right, I can do it. But if I turn to my left, my balance will be way off.
Your right ears and the cochlear implant.
Yeah. So it's very interesting. Like, if I turn to my right, my balance is literally, completely off. And so I really had to train myself as a dancer. So I'd be in there in the morning doing balance work that would help me, doing turn work that would help me, and it got better and better. Wow. And that's what it is. You kind of have to train your muscle. It's like muscle memory and brain memory. And that's what, dance is about. You're learning choreography, and that's how you remember it. And it's all about muscle memory. I can learn something today and I remember it next week.
Yeah.
That's how I became who I am today as well. That's how I found my confidence, was with dancing, because it's such a safe, open space. No one gets judged. You can go in that dance class, be who you want to be, and just sweat it out and just enjoy it for like an hour and a half. So I love it.
That's so interesting. So we all have that bone conduction, but in your case, you also have that literal feeling.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like, even, someone sings and they hit that high note.
Yeah.
I can literally I get goosebumps.
Really?
I can just really feel it. It's crazy. Like, even at a concert, I saw Coldplay the other week, and I couldn't stop smiling because I can just feel the music around me, the atmosphere, and it's interesting. We really feel it through our body, and it's kind of like, it's like a happiness feeling.
Oh, like you just feel like serotonin and
yeah, that's the word. That's what it feels like when I listen to music. And sometimes I even take out my implant, put my headphones in, and just listen to it deaf, and I feel it so differently, and
Really?
I love it. Yeah.
So if you take off your implant and you're just listening to music, you obviously don't get the clarified words and sounds, but you still feel the vibrations, and that still does something for you?
Yeah, you can feel that the bass, the drums, you can feel that the doom, doom, doom. I can feel it, yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. Is there anything that you find in your day-to-day life now with a cochlear implant? Are you limited by still?
I wouldn't say so. I think because I've learned how to adapt, and now I live in a flat with my boyfriend. We've got a dog now, and I think when you're growing up, you learn what's best for you and what works for you. Especially like me and Andrew's relationship, he understands me very well, to the point that sometimes in the morning I won't put on my implant for like at least an hour. So I like to enjoy it and just take my time with it, putting it on. And I can still have conversations with him because I can lip read. And sometimes I'm like, I have no idea what he's saying, but we just laugh it off. And it's, like I said, it's just about knowing what works for you. And of course, there's still limitations in terms of events that I go to and having to socialise with people. I do get very, very exhausted. So deaf people have something called concentration fatigue. And that's something, even on the show, I dealt with as well. It's where, because your brain's working so much, I'm having to lip read, and also having to hear all these sounds, the background noises, and all the other things that come with it. At the end of the day, I can be so exhausted to the point I can't even speak for myself. I have to take out my implant and just relax and really take my time to recharge, have a nap. On Love Island, I was literally having a nap for 2 hours while the girls were getting ready. I was literally out on the terrace napping.
Beautiful.
I'll literally have about 20 minutes to get ready. They'd be like, Tasha, it's time to wake up. You've got 20 minutes. I'm literally there like quickly getting ready. It's just, so concentration fatigue is something that we suffer with, and I get migraines as well.
Really?
Because of the magnet strength, sometimes gets really start causing a headache, and to a point it turns into a migraine. But that's just something that comes with it. So, that's like a side effect, I would say.
That makes sense. I mean, because your brain is working so hard to grab onto any sensation and sensory input it can. But on the other hand, you said some days you just like to, take your time putting your cochlear implant on.
Yeah.
Is that nice, just being in silence and disconnecting?
Oh, I love it. It's like my favourite thing ever. I don't know what it is. I just love, even sometimes take Luna out for a walk and not have it in. And I think it's just, I enjoy the peace and the standstill of it, because my life's quite hectic and chaotic in terms of having to go to all these premieres, events, and showing up to all these places all the time. Sometimes I just like to ground myself. That's why when I take it out, I feel so grounded and relaxed and calm and just really bring myself back to myself in a way. And it's kind of like my safe space of, okay, this is me time.
Yeah.
And that's what I like to use it as.
Because you can disconnect from that and not have any of those outside sensations, and because you were born deaf as well,
Yeah.
have you ever thought to yourself and hear yourself in your head, like an inner voice or an inner monologue?
Oh, yeah, I have like an inner voice.
That you can hear yourself inside talking?
Yeah, so it's like an inside voice, like in your little. So right now,
Yeah.
it's talking to me. Yeah, I can.
It is talking
have
to
that.
you.
Yeah, I have that little thing in my head.
And if you're like, you're doing a bunch of things, like, okay, you got to go pick up some stuff, you got to go out for this event later, this meeting. Are you also narrating, like, okay, Tasha, go and do this? Is that voice telling you something to go and do stuff as well?
Yeah. I've definitely got that. 100%. When I take up my implant, it's like talking to me sometimes.
Really?
Yeah. Sometimes when I'm home alone, I'll be like in the shower. I'd be like, oh, so the door, like in my head, I'd be like, is the door locked? Like, is it locked? Things like that.
And what about your dreams? If you have a dream, is there audio in your dream, or is it all visual and vivid?
Such a very good question. I'm a dreamer. I dream a
Yeah.
lot. I would say there is audio. Yeah.
Yeah.
I kind of make up. Yeah, there is. That's
As
interesting.
someone who's been such a big advocate and going through lots of discrimination, bullying, cyberbullying, and a lot of hurdles along the way, what advice would you have for other people who are deaf, and especially young kids dealing with it in mainstream schools and not having access to resources which includes them in society?
Do you know what? I always go by this quote. This is literally, everyone's probably heard me say this
I
so
love a
many
good quote,
times,
yeah.
but no one else is you, and that's your biggest power. And that's something I stand by every day. If you're ever feeling down or if you're struggling, just remember that nobody else is you. And that's something so amazing to have. And, in school, it will get hard, but just be patient and ground yourself and just remember that it won't always be hard. You will find your wins, you will find your path, and you will find what works for you in the future. And don't be scared as well. Don't let your disability stop you. Don't let it define you. If anything, it's something unique that you have.
Yeah.
And it's all about just be unstoppable and be brave and go for it and never let it stop you.
You've epitomized and manifested that. And again, as someone who's so deeply rooted in that deaf community, I was quite interested in deaf culture, and it's become its own identity as well.
Yeah.
And there are lots of families of deaf parents who have a deaf child, and they want the child to continue being deaf because having that nonverbal communication is a gift in its own right. If it's not too personal, one day if you had a family and kids of your own, and if your child was born deaf, what would be your thoughts about looking at restoring their hearing versus continuing to be part of the deaf community without any hearing?
Oh, that's a good question. I've never been asked that before, ever. Do you know what? The deaf culture is actually crazy. There's so much politics in the deaf culture.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
There's so much politics that even to myself, I couldn't believe the things that beliefs that people have. Then again, it's beliefs that people do have. And I think if I was to have a child of my own that was born deaf, I think I would love to give the child an opportunity, to have hearing. And because for me personally, the Cochlear implant opened up so many opportunities for me. It's got me to where I am now. And I'd love to give that opportunity to my child as well. And in a way, I feel like if you're born deaf, I didn't ask for it.
Yeah.
It came to me.
Yeah.
And I feel like I'll see that same for my child. So I think I'd love to, that's probably what I'll do for my child, is exactly what my parents did for me. It'd be nice to give them that opportunity of having both things. Like for me, I have both things. I can be deaf for a week and enjoy it if I wanted to. So exactly, I want to give my child that opportunity as well to have the best of both worlds in a way.
And I know the deaf community as well is really hot on language, as are many different communities. Like, people who are neurodivergent like to have the identity first.
Yeah.
So they don't like to say a child with autism, an autistic child. I guess it's similar in the deaf community, a deaf child rather than a child with deafness or a child with a hearing impairment, because that suggests it's something negative.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that? And what's the kind of lingo and the jargon you want to be out there for the deaf community?
I just say I'm hearing impaired. That's how I like to identify myself and label myself. And that's just something I've always grown up saying that was,
Yeah.
because I've got cochlear implants, I'm hearing impaired. And I know for some people, they don't like to label and
Yes.
identify themselves like that. And even the lowercase d, deaf, that means that, I'm deaf with a lowercase d. And there's so many different, if you do an uppercase D, I can't remember what uppercase D deaf means for. I think it's...
So capital D deaf?
Yeah, means something else. But
Really?
lowercase d means deaf, like hearing loss deaf. It's very interesting.
Wow.
The culture, the deaf culture is, terminology, identity. There's so many different ways to identify yourself. And, I think it's just finding out what's best, how you want to identify yourself is completely up to you. But I don't necessarily like to be identified as a deaf person. For example, when I went on the show, all the articles were like first deaf islander on the show.
Yeah.
And I completely get it. It was amazing, positive, groundbreaking change that needed to happen. But at the same time, it's like, I do have a name, I do have...
You're a person.
Yeah, I am a person. So those little things sometimes do get to me a little bit. They'll be like, oh yeah, some people be like, oh yeah, that's that deaf islander that's on the show. And it's like, no, that's not how I label myself. I'm, Tasha.
And I also feel, again, some of the myths about, being deaf is that it's an all-encompassing umbrella term. Like, you're deaf means you're just deaf. It's one condition. But actually, like, as we know, there are so many different causes why you can be deaf. You can be from earwax buildup, something benign like that, to a tumor around the ear, to a perforated eardrum, to, all sorts of different other things, otosclerosis or whatever. So there's so many different things. Some are treatable, some are not, some can be managed. So I also feel like it's a bespoke thing. If you're deaf, doesn't mean you are part of just one group. There's so many little subgroups and sub-brackets within that.
Yeah. Like you said there, it's interesting because you can literally turn deaf any day.
Yeah.
It could be from loud music and boom. I've met so many people that have been like, I was hearing until the age of 16. I just lost it one day.
Yeah, that's it. And I don't think we should separate it as part of the human body or normal part of human life, because eventually age-related deafness in some capacity, as we live longer and longer, that will affect us. Someone who's 90 and healthy will have a worse hearing than they did at the age of 20.
Yeah.
So for me as well, even when I'm in the hospital, or if I'm on a busy road and listening to music, or if there's like roadworks going on, I'm so mindful these days of, okay, I don't want to expose myself to loud noises for too long.
Yeah.
Because like as we're talking right now, I guess like the conversation may be around 60 decibels, just us talking. Maybe, again, music we listen to around the same. A whisper might be around 30 decibels. But actually, if you look at the science, persistently having 80 decibels or above is actually quite harmful to those, our ears and the hair cells in our ears, which can actually be destroyed. And once they're destroyed, they don't grow back.
Yeah.
So I think I wish people, I love the stuff you're doing, and I wish people cared more about the ears and deafness.
I think that's what it is. Like you said, it's just very overlooked. And I think maybe people are scared to talk about it because they know that eventually it could happen to them when they age. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe it's just that fear. And I think, like I said, I think people just don't see it as a proper disability and just think, oh, they're deaf, they can deal with it. They've got a cochlear implant, it's fixed. It's like, no, that's not the case. The cochlear implant hasn't fixed my ear at all. It's just something that, I hear from a robotic implant is what I say. It's actually
helps you.
Yeah, helps me hear.
Get into the hearing world, as it were.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of misconceptions around deafness, 100%.
So, Tasha, before I let you go, you've got a question for me. I don't know what it is, but feel free to fire away.
Okay, so I want to ask, what is the scariest operation you've ever done?
Oof, that is a good question. There are quite a few scary ones that I've done. Probably the scariest one, and the one that really sticks in my mind from many years ago, it was a cancer operation, and a specific type of cancer called pseudomyxoma peritoni. And the colloquial name for that is jelly belly.
Oh.
So when you open up these people, they literally have all this mucus and jelly-like material all in their insides. And it's really scary to see. And it's a horrible condition, and you end up removing essentially, sometimes most of their colon, the ovaries, uterus, some pelvic structures, and you can essentially, you're scooping out so many of their organs because this jelly, this mucinous stuff can just like affect everything. And it's a type of cancer, but it can sort of affect all organs inside and spread everywhere. And it's quite horrible. And the weirdest part is, that's one part of the operation. And the second part of the operation is once you've removed all of that jelly stuff and the cancer that you can see, you then basically put like a little swimming pool full of hot chemotherapy inside their belly. And you leave it for like half an hour or something. And then you come back and you drain off that fluid.
Wow, thank you for telling me that.
Thank you so much for coming on this podcast. And again, I love what you're doing to raise awareness. I always like on these podcasts and the stuff I do online, talk about taboo topics, raise awareness about invisible conditions and things people tend to talk about less. So, again, fantastic to have you here and keep advocating for the deaf community.
Thank you for having me.
So that was Tasha Ghouri, and to keep up that theme of hearing loss and all things ears, I want to get into the nitty-gritty of all of that nonsense you hear online. There are so many myths about hearing loss, about hearing impairment, and that's why we've got If It Ducks Like a Quack to crush those ridiculous medical myths. If it ducks like a quack. Now, one of the things I've seen circulated online is the myth that if you start wearing hearing aids at a young age, you become overly dependent on them. You hear sound in your brain. I know that's a weird concept to understand, but essentially your ears are a sensory organ and they give the sound waves converted to electricity to your brain. And it's your brain that appreciates that sound, that music, that cat meowing or screaming. It all happens in your brain. And if you deprive your brain of those sounds, there is evidence that slowly that part of the brain, the auditory regions, begin to switch off. So actually stimulating your brain and the auditory pathways with sound from a young age is important in communication, language development, and that part of the brain which is essential in interpreting those electronic signals into sound. Now, this other myth, again, frequently circulated online and usually on social media with some ridiculous ear cleaning trend as well. Wax is unhygienic. Now, you may have seen on TikTok or Instagram these videos going viral about people, doing ear candling where they put some flames near their ears and they're basically trying to get rid of ear wax because it's unhygienic, it's dirty. It's not. Now, earwax is a combination of sweat and oils and skin, and it basically helps to trap harmful toxins and bugs and microbes that could cause problems in your ears. So it's actually doing you a favor and helping you self-clean your ears. But in some cases, it can build up and it can stick to the eardrum, stop it vibrating, and basically cause a mechanical obstruction to the flow of those sound waves and limit the amount of vibrations that the eardrum can give to the inner ear. And in those cases when earwax builds up to a dangerous level and causes partial deafness or even a fully blown conductive hearing deafness, then you may need to see a healthcare practitioner to get your wax removed, microsuction, or any other ways they may want to do it. If you have really hard earwax, which can be painful, then you might want to consider safely prescribed by a medical professional some sodium bicarbonate drops to soften that wax. You can use olive oil drops, especially for itchy ears. I would avoid those social media trends of pouring, strong hydrogen peroxide into your ear that's not diluted, ear candling, flames near your ears, and generally sticking things in your ears that you wouldn't stick near your private parts. And in this week's Crowd Science, we have a question from Karan who asks, I'm 45 and I've had a dodgy knee for many years now, since my 20s when I tore the cartilage on a night out. Oops. At the time, the doctor said because I was young, it would heal itself. Nowadays, it's causing more and more pain, and I wonder if it's my age that's causing it to get worse again. Can that happen? Would really like to know. So Kieran, that's a really important question, and I'm sorry you're struggling with this chronic knee pain, it seems, for a long time now. And again, there is a bit of nuance to be had here. And if you are having chronic knee pain that is affecting your quality of life, that's debilitating you in any way, you should go and see a doctor so you can be referred to a specialist to assess you. But based on what you've said, the limited evidence of what you said, and understand as well that I'm not able to examine you or have any access to your specific history, but looking at the literature, there is a higher incidence of post-traumatic knee osteoarthritis, especially after injuries like an ACL injury or any sort of ligament or knee injury that you've had. So a sports person who's had an ACL injury, or even yourself, when you're a young man, you had an ACL injury, that will increase your risk of osteoarthritis and definitely earlier osteoarthritis as well. And if you want to go back and listen to my episode I did with Simon Fleming, who's an orthopedic surgeon, we cover osteoarthritis, that narrowing of the joint space in the knee, where essentially the cartilage thins to a point where it's almost disappeared, and you've got the two bones that surround the knee sort of rubbing and crunching against each other and causing that pain. But also having an ACL injury or some sort of ligament tear or some sort of injury to the knee at an early age, that can also increase your risk of chronic pain in the knee as well. That is quite common. So definitely go and see a specialist to get that looked at. And, if simple painkillers don't work, you may need a combination of seeing a specialist, physio, rehab. So hope that helps. And in this week's Crowd Science Extra, we've got a question from Dolly from Dorset, very nice part of the country. Dolly said basically she's getting back into the gym, and in her gym, she's been using a special scale that tells her BMI, and the BMI has given her some degree of anxiety, and it's ruined her mood and affecting her going to the gym. Is the BMI all it's cut out to be? Is it real? Is it worthwhile measuring your BMI? I answer all that and more in this week's Crowd Science Extra. Get in touch at thereferralpod.com. I'm sorry to say that is the end of another episode. Subscribe for weekly episodes and hit the notification icon so you don't miss out when I release another beautiful episode of The Referral. I'll see you next time.